Thanks for tuning in and welcome back to the shop. For those of you who are regular viewers, you'll know this is our 2013 Mitsubishi Fuso FG and we're turning it into an overland camper. For those of you that are new around here, well, now you know as well. Let's get back in the shop. It's a little bit warmer and less snowing in there. The title of this build series has been the slow build, and with good reason. It's taking a long time. I thought it might be interesting to take a look back at all the things that I've done that have been making it such a slow build. So, without further ado, roll that intro. Thanks for tuning in and welcome back to the shop. I don't know about you, but I think it's time we supersize this Fuso.
2 years ago, I started working on this project, and of course, the cool mods had to happen first. That's right, super single tires. With the fun stuff done, it was time to focus on repairing the cab rust, so I pulled the interior and started cutting and welding the floor. With the metalwork done, I added a fresh coat of chassis saver paint to the interior before fabricating some mounts for our new seats. With all that completed, it was time to add some Neuco sound deadener to the cab floor. I diagnosed a four-wheel drive issue and replaced the vacuum lines on the four-wheel drive actuator with some nice fresh ones. And I also replaced a slightly worn-out vacuum tank. At least that was the start of some rust removal. I spent a lot of time in SketchUp modeling and designing different ways we could set up the interior of the camper and figuring out what size we wanted things to be. We went through a lot of different possibilities but ended up deciding on a flat floor, 14 foot long, 7 foot high, 7 foot wide box. And that meant it was time to start building the subframe. After separating the original subframe from the chassis, I wanted to see how much flex the chassis had, so it was off to measure some twisting. The answers that I got from these tests resulted in my spring mount setup to allow the chassis to twist without imparting the stress on the habitat box. And with this sorted out, I was able to start building the subframe and flat deck. After all that steel welding, it was time to get on to some diagnostic repairs, which went pretty deep. I dug into changing the PCV filter and came up with my own tool to make the job much easier. And of course, I had to perform an oil change just to get everything to baseline. Things were starting to look pretty good with the truck, and oh, look at this magnificent beast. I visited Jean-Francois at Next RV and picked up my composite panels for building the habitat, which meant I had to get to work on building the framework for it. TIG welding aluminum was something I had wanted to improve my skills on for a long time, and this was a great project for it. There was a lot of aluminum welding, and it took far longer than I expected. With the floor frame done, it was time to press in the floor pans. And since the subframe was ready, I loaded it up and sent it out to get sandblasted in preparation for painting. And that meant it was time to get dirty, attacking the rust on the truck frame. With all the rust removed, Krista and I masked off everything on the chassis to prepare it for paint. This was a huge step. Now it's starting to look good. With the chassis done, I applied the same paint to the freshly blasted subframe. It's taken a long time to get here, but at last we have a base to start building on. I added a small NOCO float charger to maintain the truck's batteries since the truck did a lot of sitting. I also added a kill switch to isolate the batteries. I learned and showed you how to pull the SPN and FMI diagnostic info through the gauge cluster and...
What? Okay, I got the bolt out, and I was test fitting to see if this bolt would fit, and I just saw something that should not be happening. I mean, I've heard of a live axle before, but come look at this. So, this is where I took the two bolts out, right? These two holes here. This is the leaf spring, and I wonder if this bolt will fit through here. Started moving it around, and you see that? What is going on? There should not be a voltage difference between here and here. This is the axle, the spring pack, and that's the frame. That's not right at all.
So it was into some heavy electrical diagnostics to figure out where the fault was, and I showed you how to simplify electrical issues to narrow down where the fault might be. I also went back and did some needed maintenance to the chassis, including changing out the fuel tank vent, and swapping out the heavily corroded fuel pump before it failed and replacing it with a much more economical option. And since I was in the fuel system, I used a great little wrench from Road Overland to change out my fuel filter. I decided to make a quick little reference video for disassembly and the correct reassembly of one of the front locking hubs. Hopefully a quick, easy reference for anyone who needs it. I added some fancy plastic to my wheel nuts and built a "this is not a hitch" to support my spare wheel, which will show up a little later. Then it was back to more aluminum work, finishing up the flat deck corners. Now that the flat deck had corners on it, I could install my taillights. And of course, some crazy bright reverse lights. No matter how much I did, there always seemed to be more aluminum work, but I didn't mind. Bending and welding allowed me to learn and get better at what I was doing and gave me full control over how this project turns out. I felt like I was actually starting to get the hang of TIG welding and being able to turn cardboard CAD into reality. With the front corners done, I added a power inlet to the flat deck for easier connecting to the onboard charger, and this has been one of my favorite additions done to the truck so far. With all four corners on the flat deck, adding the marker lights was next with these simple yet very effective LEDs. And then there was always more welding to do. Since I was getting decent at making things out of metal, I decided it was time to start making some other useful parts. So I cranked up SketchUp and created some switch blanks and adapters. And of course, I 3D printed them. But why stop there? I could print so much more. Now that looks better. Oh right, there's more cutting, bending, and welding to do. The floor pans definitely needed some cross stiffeners, so let's get to wrapping up this floor. With all that 1/8 inch welding under my belt, I stepped up my TIG game into some much thicker and out of position welding. I made up mounts for the lift jacks, and I even got into some pipe welding for the jack foot extensions. This allowed me to get the truck out from under the floor in order to do more welding. And finally, it was time to start the walls. Oh my god, this thing is gonna be huge. Or if you're from northern New York, it's gonna be huge, Tom, it's gonna be huge. Check out this magnificent beast. With help from Pierre Carl, things really started to take shape. The transformation of adding the composite panels really gave us a push forward in the progress feel, and having an experienced helping hand made one of the biggest steps also one of the least stressful. With the right knowledge and the right tools on hand, overnight we went from a bunch of welded aluminum to a habitat box. The next step was on me. Adding in the insulation and wrapping up the floor came next, with Krista stepping in to help tape the seams. I figured that before we got too far, I should probably actually attach the subframe to the truck so we didn't tip over and destroy everything we'd worked so hard for. With the roof glued down and the door installed, we just had to know, how much does this thing actually weigh? That's pretty light. Speaking of lights, we installed some lights. And added some power inlets as the last bits of the habitat box were about to get glued in. Next up, Krista started assembling her kitchen cabinets. I secured them together to make one large cabinet. And ran into a bit of a problem. But as you know, solving problems is kind of what this project has been about, and I'm sure there will be a lot more.
If this is a project that inspires you, I'm glad. That's kind of the point of this series. I want to show people that it is possible to start from nothing and build it into what you want. When I started out, I really didn't know that much about Fuso trucks. I definitely had never built a box before, and I wasn't really creating very much YouTube content. The purpose of this has pushed me to learn about the truck, learn about building the boxes, and get better at creating YouTube content. One of the questions that I get is, what do you use to create YouTube videos? And when I started out, it's probably fairly obvious that I had very low quality equipment. I was using a very old iPhone and no external microphones and no lighting. Hopefully you're seeing this is slowly improving. I have now changed to a newer iPhone, not that much newer, but definitely better quality. I've got some backfilling lights, and I've now upgraded to a much nicer microphone. I hope you're able to see the difference. So, if it's something that you're thinking of doing, whether it's creating content or building a truck, I would say go for it. I hope you enjoyed that look back at the last 2 years of creating this truck. If you did and you haven't already, consider subscribing. I appreciate everyone who is subscribing to this channel and helping it grow. There's plenty more of this content to come because I'm not planning on speeding up anytime soon. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.